studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Bill Gates is here. His philanthropic organization, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is centered on the belief that every life has equal value. It follows 4 values to define it: work, optimism, collaboration, rigor, and innovation. The foundation has invested more than $1 billion in programs to fight disease and poverty in India. In January, the country marked 1 full year since the last case of wild polio virus was detected there. Gates recently returned from a visit to India.
India's an amazing place. 20% of the people on the planet live there, and it's the world's biggest democracy. It's energetic, it's chaotic, there's a lot of neat new things happening there. They have a lot of talented people. I try to take advantage of all the time on these trips to meet with as many of these great people as I can. And it's really a chance to learn. I learned as much on this trip as any trip. Well, Uttar Pradesh is a gigantic state. It's 200 million people, so it would be the 5th biggest country in the world if it was a country all by itself. It's the poorest part of India. There's a lot of health problems there. Well, the Ujorian slum is tough to visit because the makeshift homes and the lack of services show you that it's a very tough life. And yet, sitting down with the people there, they want their kids to get educated. They're thinking about how many kids they want to have. They do have a sense that things are going to get better. And so it's uplifting in a way, even though at first it's pretty shocking to be reminded of how tough their conditions are.
So you go to India, what, once a year?
At least once or twice a year.
Tell me what you're seeing from year to year to year.
Well, the country is growing its economy. It's doing that by educating its people better, by taking care of health conditions better. It's doing a lot of innovation on its own behalf. And it's exciting to go and see what's taking place. It often will take steps backwards as well as step forwards. The democracy makes it a little bit more complex place to get things done, but overall it's been a benefit to India. I'd say health is improving as fast as in India as anywhere in the world.
What are than anywhere in the world because of the base that they're coming from?
Right. That is, they're reducing childhood death because they're adding vaccines, they're improving vaccine coverage. They had the polio victory, and that's really energized the health system. And, as they're getting more government revenues, fortunately, they're putting it into health systems, and they get a lot of advice on making sure that money's well spent. That's one of the things we try and help with.
Over the long term, in terms of decades out, will India or China be in a better place?
Well, China is quite far ahead of India in terms of...
But will India catch up?
China would have to hit a plateau. The rate of economic growth in China has been higher than in India for all of the last 20 years. And, what that means in terms of, say the personal computer market's about 7 times bigger in China than India. The health indicators were a lot better. So China set a very strong example. Now, India often will make reforms because they're jealous. There's 2 big jealousies in India. India's jealousy of China and jealousy within the country from state to state, where some states will do reform policies, those will work, and then that's a positive dynamic that's helped a lot.
Which one has the best climate of innovation and culture of innovation?
Well, that's hard to compare. They both are putting law into their top universities. In the sense of actual research, China is ahead on that. In terms of turning out lots of good software engineers, people who are doing coding for companies all over the world, India's the lead in that, and that's been really a gem in their economy, is creating those high-paying jobs.
And China?
China, in terms of manufacturing, terms of broad engineering outside of the computer science space. They have more colleges that are world class, and they do more in terms of research, and so it's further ahead, and it'll be hard for India to catch China.
You used to say to me, and many times, that when Bill Gates, went to China, they sucked everything they could get out of you in terms of what you thought and what they could learn from you. Correct?
Yeah, both countries are very good.
Do the Indians do the same? That's what I'm asking.
Both countries have looked at the U.S. and what it does well, including having really strong universities, including having sort of capitalistic markets, and they've moved in that direction. And in fact, their growth comes from that fact. China is dramatic because it was very anti-market until 1979, and then all of a sudden it opened up, brought in a lot of foreign technology. So they were way behind India, and then they really went full bore.
Right.
India's done reforms, and every time it does reforms, it gets some growth out of that, and the expectation is that will continue. So they both benefited immensely from looking at the West and looking at what allowed the great success in the West.
But do you see restrictions on China because there's less freedom of expression, say, than there is in India? That kind of thing.
Well, there's no restriction in terms of inventing new medicines or new software or things of that kind.
It's political.
Yeah, it's much more in the, if you want to speak out about
Tiananmen Square.
what's going on with the government, then you get into an area. But as yet, that hasn't really held back their scientific and engineering activity. Most of the people in the computer space, the pharmaceutical space, a lot of companies have both an India and China presence now. In fact, if a global company doesn't have some presence in those countries, you really wonder, what are they doing about those markets and the intelligence that's available.
But what about the difference in the companies? For example, in China, many of them have state ownership element. Do they have the same thing in India?
No, fortunately for India, that is one thing they've done better, is they have more on the private side. Now, a lot of those state-owned enterprises in China are acting more like private enterprises. The oil companies, the mobile phone companies, there's a lot of those giant companies that are behaving in a pretty strongly capitalistic way. But you do worry that if the signals of the marketplace and what the government wanted diverged, will they be run that way? Whereas in India, it's much more private sector driven. Now, they still control prices more. Labor mobility is lower than in China. Property sales are more difficult. Things like water and electricity are subsidized in a way that they're used in a not as efficient fashion. So if you just scored market signals, China flipped over and has been more driven by market signals than India has.
But the foundations is much more centered in India than it is in China by a wide margin.
That's right, and that's because of largely of the need in India. That is, the north of India, including Uttar Pradesh, people are quite poor there, and the government hasn't gotten the vaccination coverage out. It hasn't gotten women to deliver in a facility where they can be taken care of even if things go wrong. And so it's that gap that motivates a lot of our work there. Some of it, though, is that in the area of vaccines, India is more innovative. China's trying to catch up, but companies like Serum Institute, a private company in India, is actually the highest volume vaccine manufacturer in the world.
And did you have some influence on that? Did the fact that the foundation came in there and was interested in it and therefore showed some encouragement to them?
Well, Serum had gotten in before we came along, but because of their willingness to do high volume, low price, we've helped them grow. So like the meningitis vaccine that is being delivered in Africa, they became our partner in terms of building that. So they're about 3 times the size they were when we first started working on projects together.
And how about the partnership with government, in which the foundation can sort of do seed stuff and then the government can bring it up in scale?
Yeah, we've had great success with a number of programs. For AIDS prevention in India, what turned out to be the best approach was to create communities of the people who are at risk, including sex workers. And by creating those communities and having peers educate each other about what safe practice was, AIDS rates in India have actually gone down. And that's a case where we came in, created the initial framework, and now we're turning a lot of that over to the government. And so far, they've done a really good job of maintaining the strength of those programs.
So India, as a developing nation, is a model for what can be done in partnership.
Absolutely. The fact that it's a democracy, that the fact states are seeing each other, trying to catch up, it's a very positive dynamic.
How much corruption?
Well, there's always going to be some corruption. What you want to do is you want to design systems that make it harder for there to be corruption, where you can really trace the money down to the recipient of that money. That's partly why we'd like to get digital currencies on cell phones, so you don't have as much where somebody else can collect it along the way.
You'd like to get that done. What's necessary for that to happen?
The cell phones are now getting powerful enough. The government has to set some standards. There's a lot of energy being put into this in India. It's happened only in Kenya. It's the only developing country that has this digital currency. And now that India sees that it's happened in one place, they're trying to clear out the regulations and get it going.
And how does it work in Kenya?
You can actually use your cell phone and send money to other people, like a relative that's out in the rural area, or if you go into a store and buy something, you can just do that on the cell phone.
And they take their cell phone in to do things, buy products or whatever?
Exactly. And so it makes all these financial issues, the fees to move money around, to have loans of various types, it makes it a lot simpler when you're not having to handle paper currency.
I mean, how do they view you over there in India?
Well, they're always very nice.
Well, I know that, but do they have a name for you? Are you just Bill Gates? Does it,
well,
are you
Gates,
our great friend, Bill Gates? Are you?
I wouldn't say it's so much me personally,
but as
the fact that the foundation has, through its projects, gained credibility, that we're not in there for a big press conference. We're not just going to go for a few years and then leave. We're willing to admit mistakes, programs that don't go very well. We really do give credit to partners. So we've developed enough commitment that's evident to people there that, we can actually, sit down and talk with any parts of the government or other partners and, get things done. We've worked closely with a few other states. The new Chief Minister in Uttar Pradesh noticed that, and so we're actually starting something in what is the toughest part of India.
Yeah. It's the place of the most extreme poverty.
That's right, and it's 200 million people. It's hard to believe. A single state
big as the United
in
States,
India
almost,
would be the fifth biggest country in the world.
And the poverty comes from simply
It's very agricultural oriented, and the farming productivity is not very high. And just the density of the people, you're trying to feed 200 million people on a reasonably small piece of land.
Agriculture has become one of your interests.
I'm trying to learn about it. It's a place where scientific innovation can make a huge difference. If you get rid of plant diseases, if you double productivity, it makes all the difference in the world in terms of children's nutrition.
You met some women there raising their children, I think, in terms of the slums. What did you feel about the empowerment of women?
Well, the key thing we're trying to help with is making sure that women who want reproductive health tools, that they have access to them. And what's fascinating is that if you're in the upper half of wealth, if you want a certain number of children, you have access, right. You end up getting what you want. If you're in the bottom half, on average, you have more than one more child than you intended to have. And it just means that the access to the tools, the education hasn't been there. And so getting that out there is a challenge. I went into the slums to talk to women about how they thought about that. How did they see the options? Who would come to talk to them? What fears did they have? And it was very educational.
What did they say?
Well, for some of the women, sterilization is forbidden religiously. And, so that's off the table, even though historically the Indian government has made that available. That doesn't work. They showed a lot of enthusiasm for having choice. They really wanted women to come and talk to them in a very private and confidential way. And so we're doing pilots that we hope the government will take out on, where you have lots of these women community health workers go out and talk to them. And given a set of choices, it looked like a lot of them would be way better off, be able to either space births or choose voluntarily to have one less child.
What's the state of philanthropy?
Well, it's coming along. Every country's kind of different. This is one of the areas the U.S., by many measures, is the most generous. Even if you take out religious giving and just take social service giving, the U.S. would score as number one. And that's not just wealthy people giving. That's very much broad-based generosity. And so other countries have some tradition. Some of the tech successful people like Azim Premji from Wipro, he has been a real leader. He's doing a lot of schools and
he's
things
been doing
there.
that for a while, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's really been great.
Yeah.
And we had a group of people sit and talk about what is the role of philanthropy versus government. You don't want to feel like you're just replacing government because that's too big. You want to feel like you're being catalytic and you're showing government how to spend their money better. You can pick some things that will make a huge difference. So it's a good discussion, and I expect philanthropy in India, particularly as they get more and more wealthy people, it'll grow quite dramatically.
Are they interested in the Giving Pledge?
Well, they'll go their own way. I doubt they'll do a pledge type thing when you're in an early stage. Just getting all the philanthropists together on a regular basis to talk about what's worked, what hasn't worked, where they should collaborate. The commitment they made was to have an annual event, so I was super happy, and they're driving all that. I'll just be a invited guest.
Let me talk about polio and also talk about malaria and where we are. I mean, as you and I have talked about before, when you announced that you were going to focus most of all on polio eradication, a lot of people step forward to say, aren't there bigger problems? And you basically said, this is one where I can make a difference and we can eradicate polio. How are we doing on that score?
Well, the big good news is the India elimination, where their last case was in January 2011, and they've stayed polio-free. We have 3 countries left, 3 tough ones, Pakistan and Afghanistan. So those are the 2 in Asia. And then in Africa, it's Nigeria. And, they should be doable. India was just as hard as they should be. So with the right political commitment, a little bit of innovation in the tools, I feel quite confident we'll get it done. It is the thing I spend the most time on, and making sure there's enough money for it, making sure we're trying out new things. Yeah. It's hard work.
But the reason you spend the most time because you want to do something where you can actually believe you have accomplished your purpose, or is it deeper and broader than that?
Well, the world has invested a lot in polio eradication. And
been reasonably successful?
Well, if we stop the effort, then it'll spread back to the other countries.
So you got to eliminate.
And so we're in a very precarious situation that you either get it to 0 or else you accept the fact you'll go back to hundreds of thousands of kids getting paralyzed every year. So if we knew we were going to give up, then we wasted a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of credibility. If we can take the next 2-3 years and get it right, then the payoff is really quite phenomenal. And I think India helped a lot for people to see that even in the toughest places, this can be done. Now, each of these countries remaining, have a little bit more unrest than India had. They have less children in total. And, so I'm a big believer. It is a worthy top priority because once you spend the money, you don't have to spend any more.
Exactly. In a value analysis, does something suffer because you're focused on polio?
Well, the foundation has finite resources, and the global health community as a whole, if you take all the foreign aid that gets spent on health, that's a finite amount of money. Ideally, a growing pool, but there's a lot of uncertainty about this. No, I don't think I'd question that polio is a good priority because we use polio to get the regular immunization, the normal vaccines, we use that to build that system. So the legacy of success here will be very high rates of immunization against all diseases in these remaining tough countries.
When today you're here in New York and you went to see some scientists over at Rockefeller about mosquitoes, which is how you spend your time in part now.
It's exciting.
Exactly. So why is it exciting today? What was interesting about today's meeting, just to give everybody a sense of what you add to your life?
Well, Richard Axel, who's
Nobel laureate.
Right, has done some brilliant work with some collaborators on how mosquitoes smell things. And once you understand that mechanism, then you can create something and try a bunch of chemicals and see what interferes with their smell. And if you got something that was really cheap, easy to apply, then you could make it so that people wouldn't be bitten. And if you add that together with the bed nets and some other tools, the idea is that you could eliminate malaria in various areas. And so it's innovative work. Getting a new insecticide out and approved is 5 or 6 years' work. But this is brilliant science that is going to give us a new tool in the fight against malaria. Are you
encouraging that or by philanthropic contribution?
Oh, we fund most of this research.
So when you look at malaria, can we eradicate malaria?
Eventually.
Eventually is how many years?
Well, I think we keep modeling and looking at prospective tools, better drugs, vaccine, things like this, a repellent. And I think sometime in the next 10 years, we'll have the tools to go out and really shrink the malaria map. Now, it still could be 20, 25 years before we get the entire disease done. But we'll be able to cut the numbers a lot. So the big priority right now is to use the tools we have, which are largely bed nets, and to invent 2 or 3 additional tools that will...
Like the one you were looking into
Exactly.
Yeah.
The repellent, we looked at the modeling, would be a very, very helpful tool.
What are you doing for HIV virus?
Well, HIV, the dream is still a vaccine, and one approach to that, which are these so-called antibodies, and that are now, they're finding ones that are so powerful that they really look like they could block the disease. So how do you get those into humans? How do you get humans to produce it? We still have some work to do there. But I think that science has gone better than we would have expected. Again, on that one, it may be a decade before we have the magic tools to really, really cut the numbers.
Did you have what you now have, this fascination and love for science? And I'm taking computer science and leaving it out. For a while, I mean, was this something that was in you? Were you as a kid interested in science?
Absolutely.
Across the board?
Across the board. And in my 20s and 30s, during the creation and my hyper focus on Microsoft, I read a little bit of science, but a little bit I had to know one thing super, super well. And so I've been able to broaden my being up to date on science, meeting with great scientists as part of this foundation work. And that's a real pleasure.
See, that's an interesting idea. Just stay with that for a second. I mean, you said that, in order to do what you did with Microsoft, you had to, you just had to, as you once said to me, you just had to have a focus on that at all times, and other things suffered. Is that simply the price of building a company like Microsoft?
I think the world's best companies are built by fanatics, and when you're in your 20s and 30s, being fanatical at least came pretty naturally to me.
You didn't think that was another way?
No, I wanted to let everybody have cool software, and so I didn't feel that bad that that's what I was doing. I think now, in my 50s, this way of operating, where I'm, backing a lot of these great scientists, is what is the most natural for me. So I'm very lucky.
Most natural meaning most in comparison to
trying to be fanatical about one thing at this point in time. So what I did in my 20s and 30s was a great fit for that time period.
No, I know, and I'm not one of those, although I've asked you before, to compare one with the other. However, Malcolm Gladwell was recently quoted, and who wrote Outliers and other books that I'm sure you know about and have read, basically said that, 100 years from now, 50, he said 50 years from now, Bill Gates is going to be known as a philanthropist, not as the founder of Microsoft. And they'll be building statues around the world to him. And he said, Steve Jobs, who you admired for what he did in building Apple, will not be known hardly 50 years from now. Meaning the focus on philanthropy has a different resonance in terms of how history puts you.
Well, I don't think anybody does the work they do based on how they're going to be remembered.
Of course not.
You know, Steve Jobs did phenomenal work, both, you know, when I partnered with him, when Microsoft competed with him, and, you know, that deserves to be remembered as something quite incredible. You know, I love my present work, but I really can't distinguish it, you know, in terms of contribution or importance.
I understand. I didn't ask that question, as you know, although I've asked it before. But, I mean, so I'm interested, too, we'll get back to philanthropy, too, and health and other broader international issues. But, I mean, help me understand what it takes to build a Microsoft or to build an Apple or to build a Facebook, and in terms of what it is that you and Mark and Steve have.
Well, in each of those cases, you had people who were quite fanatical.
Fanatical? What does fanatical mean?
Work day and night, sort of, you know, don't worry about the possibility of failure. Every setback is just something to work a little bit harder at doing. And you really know what you're trying to achieve. And you're going to hire the best people, and you're going to change your strategy until you can get that to happen.
In your mind, you were trying to achieve what?
Oh, the magic of software being available to everybody, both in their work and at home.
But the magic, because this is just what you wanted to do, or because you knew that if you did that, you would be the world's richest man?
No. Actually, we didn't think we'd be worth that much money because we had this sort of high volume.
We being you and Paul?
Yeah,
or we being
Paul
you
and I, or
right.
any of us. We had this sort of high volume, low price approach. Now, eventually the volumes got big enough that the numbers got very significant. But software is kind of a tool to take human creativity, humans' desire to reach out to other people. Software is kind of a multiplier on what humans are good at. And so when you thought about that, it was going to be so exciting. And it's still unfolding today. You know, what does software mean for education? What does it mean for healthcare? Those journeys are very much at the beginning.
And in their infancy, yes.
Absolutely.
Exactly right. You know. And so how do you factor into that sort of the applications? You know, the fact that we've had this extraordinary explosion in applications for tablets especially.
Well, there's more applications still for personal computers than for anything else. Right. You know, the idea that you enable a third-party software industry to write lots of applications, that was the original Microsoft view, and the idea that you reach out to them, give them tools, make it easy for them to write software. That is the playbook that allowed MS-DOS and Windows to be successful. Right. Now, that's a playbook that others have rightfully copied in terms of as they've come up with successful platforms. But the first time people got the importance of a platform was seeing how Microsoft took that and made it a reality with Windows. And people were like, whoa, you know, that's pretty powerful.
But that you provided software in which, as you mentioned, MS-DOS and others, and Windows, in which other people could write software for.
Right. We reached out to them.
It would not have been what it was without that.
Right. In those days, we didn't charge them any money. We didn't force them to sell through our store or anything. It was more flexible than it is today. But when you hear the word developer conference, software developer kit, those are all things that were part and parcel of the unique way it was done with MS-DOS and Windows.
If you had it to do over, knowing what you know now, would you have vertically integrated the way that Steve Jobs did?
I think for certain types of new devices, when you get to big changes where you've got to reimagine the form factor, then kind of this end-to-end design can really set off a new form factor. As you get into it and you think, okay, some people want them large, some people want them really inexpensive. There's a variety to having a rich ecosystem. And so I actually believe you can have the best of both worlds. You can have a rich ecosystem of manufacturers, and you can have a few signature devices that show off, wow, what's the difference between a tablet and a PC? In the case of the recent Microsoft work, which
Surface
is very exciting.
Yeah.
It completely blurs the idea of you don't have to make a compromise. You can have everything you like about a tablet and everything you like about a PC all in one device. And so that should change the way people look at things.
Here's what's interesting to me, and I don't quite know all the facts on this, but I know you well, and I knew Steve Jobs. It is this notion of you thought about a tablet and you thought about a touch system probably as early, if not earlier, than Steve Jobs did.
Way too early.
That was a problem. You were way too early?
Well,
or
yeah.
the problem was something else?
No, well, I think a few things could have been done differently to get to critical mass. What you see is these phenomena that if you get a device to critical mass, then you get applications written to take advantage of that. Then you get volume in the hardware so you can bring the price down. And so what you see is you could have something that was almost good enough that is forgotten for all time. And then the thing that just crossed that threshold, even though it came later, goes up and is gigantic.
Okay, but that still doesn't answer my question. How come he was able to cross the threshold and you weren't?
Well, in that case, he did some things better than I did.
Like what?
His timing in terms of, when it came out, the engineering work, just the package that was put together. The tablets we had done before weren't, as thin and
pretty.
They weren't as attractive as what came along. Now, Microsoft has something that may change the rules again.
But there's one difference in what Surface does. I mean, basically what Steve almost said was, in a sense, what's different about Surface, according to the press, is that it can be not only a receiving tablet, but also a creative tablet. You can use it to create things from it.
That's right.
And the argument was you can't do that as well.
You can't. No, that is absolutely right. That's why the PC category and the tablet category have been separate. And here you have something that fuses the best of both.
So what does that mean for the PC?
That it's the best. It gets the benefits of being a tablet.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, if the Surface works really well, is that going to eliminate people wanting to have a PC?
Well, whatever you call Surface, they will want to have it. Yeah. We'll call it a Windows 8 device. When you take two device categories that have been separate and you merge them together, there's always the question of which name survives. Because the PC's been the superset, it's had the breadth of applications, it has a keyboard and other types of rich input. Maybe we'll call the resulting thing a PC. Maybe we need a new term. Maybe they'll just call it Surface. Surface-like devices.
Do you believe that Apple has to change and Apple has to create something that will have the functionality of what you're suggesting Surface does and using software, Windows, or whatever it is?
I think it's premature to act like that's been decided in the marketplace. I certainly think that's a strong possibility, and my bias is that, yes, this is a seminal event of taking the best of the two worlds and bringing them together. It's a wonderful thing. I can't wait until it's shipping and everybody can sit and play with it, because that's the only way that you can understand what we're trying to say about it.
Has it been hard for you to watch the enormous success of Apple?
Absolutely not.
Not at all.
The fact that
they beat you.
The fact that if all software companies were doing poorly, and what was really important was some other non-software related thing, then that would be contrary to the original vision I had that, hey, software is important. The fact that the most exciting stuff in the world being done is being done by companies that are deeply software companies, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, that is amazing. And yes, these companies should jostle against each other, compete. Can Bing do a better search than Google? Can we do a better tablet than Apple? That is a fantastic thing. And I'm not starving. And the brilliance of each company spurring the other one on, this is a very positive thing.
So what do you think of the Facebook IPO?
Well, I took Microsoft public in 1986.
In a different way.
I'm sorry?
Was it a different way you took it public? I mean, what's the difference?
Well, people didn't realize how important software would be at that point.
Right.
And so our stock, over a period of about 14 years, mostly went up for 14 years. And that's kind of fun when that's going on. Then when we got to 2000, 2001, the whole tech sector was overvalued. And then for the first time, we experienced the stock going down. Mark is precocious in every way. He got to $100 billion valuation faster, and he got to, realizing once you're public, your stock price is going to go up and down. And that's a great thing. It'll help that company become more mature. I think Facebook's a very important company. I think they have a very important product. I'm a tiny bit biased because we're Microsoft partners with them.
That's right. How many years ago did you make that investment in Facebook?
Oh, that's not the important part. I mean, Steve bought, I wasn't part of that. Steve bought, on behalf of Microsoft, a few percent of the company. But the key thing more strategic than that is that as we're making Bing innovative,
right,
we work with Facebook and we're able to share information. So they see Google as a competitor, we see Google as a competitor, and we're doing a lot of innovation that brings together the strength of the two companies.
So if you look at Apple and you look at Google and you look at Amazon and you look at Facebook, and you look at Microsoft, these are the giants that are going to decide the future. And what's the goal? What will be, the golden ring for these companies?
Well, in the end, it's always about the applications. Can kids learn in a fun way? Can you track your health and keep yourself healthier? Can you stay in touch with your relatives and the people you care about in a neat way? At the end of the day, it's that application. We're seeing in education now another wave of people of trying to take courses and make them interactive and get lots of people to try and use those things. And making the device more natural, having it work with your TV set, your phone, that's all to get these really key applications to work well.
Have you for a moment, thought about, I'm going to go back. I miss it. There are things I want to do. It's become even more exciting. I'm going back to Microsoft, not once a month, but every day.
No, I put time into Microsoft, and I couldn't be more proud of the work they've done with Windows 8 and now this the Surface. But my focus is on the foundation. What's going on in global health, what we're trying to do in education. I'm trying to learn about that. I feel like in terms of bringing the pieces together, the right innovation, the systems thinking, that I'm playing the role that is most important.
Well, the role you define for yourself. Let's leave philanthropy aside for a second. I mean, what role do you play? I mean, are you a sounding board for Steve and his team, or what is your role there?
There are new projects that I get to suggest that they work on, and a number of those have been staffed and are moving along.
Well, what excites you then?
Oh, I think that the way we organize information, we're just at the beginning. Think of the memories, your family memories, and how you go back and review those things. Think of the whiteboard in the office and say, why can't I just walk up to it? And when I start to scribble ideas, it helps organize those, retrieve things. I can go back and look at what I did. I can connect up to some other person's whiteboard. We are just really at the beginning of this digitally empowered way of doing things. And so I get to have a few projects that I promote, and they're actually very nice to me and listening and taking some of them on.
How nice of them to do that.
Yeah.
Bill, be nice to him, boys. There is also, you like and inspire and believe that Facebook has a lead because of its software.
Oh, they have a unique service. If you look at the minutes used and the way they've evolved it very quickly, somebody can argue about exactly what it's worth, but it's worth a lot. It's an enduring piece of work.
And Google has the same kind of advantage in search.
Well, on that one, my bias is very, very strong that people ought to try Bing.
I know that's
it's
your
better.
bias, but can you? I mean, what's the limitation to?
Well, clearly
when
I've
you
been
look at
involved.
market share.
I've been involved in the decision of Microsoft to invest billions in it, and I'm very pleased with the work that's been done. Now, if you take the logo off and you test it now, Bing wins, but can you get people?
I don't know. Tell me
No,
how.
it's hard. It's a very hard problem.
Because brand identity and all that?
Google was the best, and people got very used to using it. And it's not terrible or anything. And so, are people willing in their mindset to think, oh, okay, now there's another search engine that I ought to try out? That'll take some really good marketing and explaining the value proposition. It's kind of a novel problem.
What would have been the advantage of Microsoft and Yahoo coming together?
Well, the key thing that we were looking at there was the search traffic, because the more traffic you have, the more you can learn. And so the key thing we wanted from Yahoo that we looked at buying the company, this is several years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, we got through a big business deal we did with them where their search traffic goes to Bing, and Bing has that information. That's been a huge...
So you ended up with all the advantage you would have had?
Oh, with the key one, the one that really was necessary.
Yeah, for search, to benefit you in search.
Right.
All right. Back to philanthropy. Let's assume that you are, in fact, can look ahead to your last day on Earth. Your last day. And it's not a bad day because, you're not sick and you're not in pain and you've just had this great life. What do you want to accomplish? What do you want to be said then? And how do you see your own future as to what it is, the way for you to spend and the smartest way for you to spend your time?
Well,
and with specific goals.
Yeah, I'd have some very specific things. For example, right now, 8 million children a year die under the age of 5. Down from, it was about 20 million a year in 1960. So we're way down.
Because of vaccinations?
Primarily because of vaccination. The fact that the world is richer, people have better nutrition is part, but over half is vaccination. Just the elimination of smallpox alone is several million of that reduction. Reduction in measles is several million of that. So, if I get to live a reasonable period of time, that should be below 2 million a year. Now, that's going to take some big advances.
So from 8 million to 2 million in your lifetime.
Absolutely. I'll be very disappointed if we can't do that.
Okay, that's one.
That's one. In education, kids should be empowered to pursue their curiosity. And they should be able to see, okay, what do I understand? What do I not understand? Help explain to me in the way that works for my way of learning and what I know and what I'm interested in. Explain mathematics, explain history, explain science. We should have tools of learning that allow everyone to pursue their full curiosity, their full potential.
You spend like an hour to a day in pursuit of learning something?
That's right. What other people spend, a lot of people watching TV in general, I spend on learning things. And it's because that's been very reinforced for me over the years.
Reinforced meaning the results of it have been clear to you, and what it adds to your own satisfaction of life and what accomplishments you can make because of it.
Exactly. And so I defining exactly this breakthrough in education that I'd like to achieve, I agree it's a little harder to define.
We'll try.
But in some ways, it's even more dramatic. I mean, when you're curious about something, you should be encouraged in that. And no one should sit around and say, oh, I'm terrible at math, and oh, I don't think I need math. We've created too many bad experiences that has a ton of people feeling that way, a lot of adults. And so education, if we can fix that, what that means at both an individual level and a society level would be really dramatic.
Okay, that's two.
Yeah, well.
Well, keep going. I want to know. So one is childhood death on an annual basis. 2 is education. 3?
Well, 3, the whole area of food, kids getting enough nutrition, farmers who have small plots being able to grow enough, the world not ending up with shortages of food as the population goes up. Is that
because we have no organization to do this, because we have the know-how, or is it something else?
We just need to keep investing in the science here. And
But the Rockefeller Foundation did that a long time
And what
ago.
they did was phenomenal. And there are hundreds of million people alive today because of the Green Revolution that they helped foster.
So what's the
and so
revolution today?
just call it Green Revolution 2.
Okay.
You know, in this one, we are just totally in their footsteps. Now, it's new science to get the productivity up to these higher levels, and you have some headwinds with the climate change, the heat, the water, and those things. But it can be done with great innovation to have enough that kids aren't malnourished and the world as a whole doesn't have food shortage.
Have you changed your philosophy about the market, about the way the world works, about some fundamental assumptions that you had?
Well, the market is the most powerful tool we've ever come up with. The limitations of the market, there are really two that are always striking. One is that you underinvest in innovation because the risk taker only gets a small part of what might be possible. And so there's tons of the amount you put into innovation is lower than it should be. And the second is that for poor people, the market does less than it should. And when you talk about innovation...
Explain that to me. For poor people, the market...
does less than it should. So let's say there's a vaccine that's been invented, but it costs more than a poor person can afford.
Right.
Then that's a system failure that it's not available to them. You compound those two weaknesses when you talk about inventing a malaria vaccine, because that's in innovation, which is always underfunded, and it's innovation for the poorest, whose voice in the marketplace is the weakest.
So we need a market that rewards a product for the poorest.
We need to complement the market with government-funded research and philanthropy that takes these areas that the market doesn't do the optimal thing and bring those back into it.
And each has its role. Government has scale, and philanthropy has seeding.
Innovation, pilots, risk-taking, yes.
Why can't government do that?
Well, the government isn't like a market where they're going to fund hundreds of scientists and be able to winnow out who's doing things well. Research takes many terms of office before it pays off. People are disproportionately hurt when something fails versus when something succeeds. Say Solyndra had been a success. Would have people said, well, of course the government was brilliant. Geez, we should just fold our party altogether because they were right about Solyndra. No, there's the upside credit goes elsewhere.
Right.
But when it goes wrong, then it's like, oh, government made those mistakes. So the government is very important for funding basic research and certain types of incentives to overcome this limitation. But for the poorest, philanthropy is still very necessary.
If you look at one thing that could do enormously huge things for the world, it would be somehow being able to affect the energy equation.
Yeah, the cost of energy, getting the cost of energy down and getting energy to be pollution-free, CO2 generation-free, is one of those big problems that will affect where the world goes.
And where are we on that?
Well, there's a lot more IQ going into this than there was even 10 years ago. In solar, in wind, in nuclear, there's a lot of different paths to get there.
Is it going to be one of those, solar, wind, or nuclear, or bio something? Yeah,
or there's another path which is continuing to use coal and natural gas, but somehow taking the CO2 out. This is called carbon sequestration, where you grab it and you liquefy it and stick it underground. Now, every one of these paths has huge problems. Solar has cost problems. It's got intermittency problems. Nuclear has to prove that it's safe. It's got to get its costs right. It's got to get the waste solution right. They're all major challenges. But I see a lot of innovators coming in, more in the U.S. than anywhere, but on a global basis. And I think if you look, 20 years out, we'll have breakthroughs, a lot of breakthroughs. Now, in the meantime, you'll have a lot of climate change. The Earth will have warmed up, and some of the ecosystems will suffer if this doesn't happen pretty rapidly.
Of all the things we've talked about, what do you wear most for your children?
I hope the world's ability to make global decisions. to deal with problems, whether it's global warming or terrorism.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, it's around the world, here domestically. I mean, can you believe, with all the things that we're smart about, we're so stupid about politics?
Well, that if you look at what's going on in science and you get really optimistic, and then you look at politics and you see some of the gridlock there, there's a real contrast right now. And so a lot of people are pessimistic because they just look at the political side and they don't see what innovation can bring to the equation. I hope politics changes. Having the level of uncertainty we have right now, whether it's about how Europe will deal with its financial crisis or how the U.S. will deal with the different views on what the government should spend on, how taxation should be done. I hope we get surprised, because those things do slow down the speed of innovation.
Do you think they will continue to kick the can down the road, or do you think when the hangman's noose tightens, they will make the right decision?
Well, I'm not a good predictor of these things. I thought the debt ceiling thing would kind of force something. And what they did with the sequestration, they put a lot of pressure on themselves and said, of course, that's just there to show you that we're serious about coming up with a compromise. And then no compromise was arrived at. And so people who know a lot more about politics should speculate about that. I hope that some middle ground is found, because you really want to be able to plan ahead. And if they're going to change scholarships, there are kids who need to have a sense about, are they going to be able to get a scholarship or not. Just having some sudden change would be a problem.
The highest levels of power and financial success, and yet at the same time you have seen, because you've made it your business to see, how all of that has been denied to all of us, some of us, who are all equal in the end. Each human life is the same. What has it done to you? How has it impacted on you?
Well, it's given me a real sense of urgency about the work we do. But the fact we've got this positive trend that, whenever you go and see a country that's in tough shape, you can say, wow, 10 years ago it was even worse, 20 years ago it was even worse. And it makes you want to bring scientists to see the problem and, think about, okay, how can these people get their dairy to market? There must be a cheap solution for this, or this disease. Let's really, bring an end to this. Overwhelmingly, I come away positive, because I get to see scientists at Rockefeller University, scientists in China doing good work.
So you have a shot at looking at the future.
Right. And I can see that even in a 5 to 10 year time frame, whether it's IT products, whether it's vaccinations, whether it's new things that will come out in the energy realm, I see that we're going to be making a lot of progress there. And I believe that we'll be able to take advantage of that. That is, the political decisions that surround all of that we will see it through.
So on June 25, 2012, Bill Gates is optimistic.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Bill Gates for the Hour, thank you for joining us. See you next time.